We are at 10:08 on the 29th of May. And finally, I've sat down with Mark Dodds and we're beginning a series of podcasts, which we have titled Our Public House or Our Pubs. And Mark has also been working on his own podcast on and off, which is Mark, give me the name of your podcast. What are you
It's all for the love of pubs,
all
and
for the pubs?
that's a contentious name in itself because lots of people think it should be called the love of pubs. I think it should be called anyway. It's called all for the love of pubs.
All for the love of
Yeah,
pubs. So, for those that don't know us, me and Mark have known each other, well, quite a long time, since the noughts, as I recall. And that's
it's
if you're
probably
still,
it's probably since. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. It's probably since around about 2008, maybe
I
a
think it
little bit
was
earlier than that.
seven, eight.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
that was it. And so way back then, Mark, what were you doing? Just remind me.
Back then, I was I mean, actually, back then I was probably suffering from depression, and I'm not being flippant at all. I was running a pub
Mm. The Sun and
in
Doves.
Camberwell called the
Yeah.
Sun and Doves, which was a courage pub originally, and then entrepreneur after the beer orders, then which is when I signed a title lease, and then it became Scottish Newcastle with me in it
Yep.
as a goods and chattels passed from entrepreneur to Scottish Newcastle, and then it became Heineken with me in it.
You had no say.
Paying,
You had no say in the change.
no say, paying for their freehold loans they bought to buy the pub, and
Mm.
when we first met, I was there. Well, I was there, um, like a hamster wheel, like a hamster on a hamster wheel, trying to pay the rent, trying to
That's
keep
right.
ahead, trying to pay the beer costs and all the rest of it, with a multiple award-winning pub that everybody in the local area seemed to think that I was really, really fortunate person who was should be driving a Jaguar and all the rest of it and having a large four-bedroom house when actually I was living above the pub, barely able to buy the groceries
Blimey.
because I was
Yep.
because I was a tied tenant. So that's where I was, and I met you, and I don't want to flatter you, but you kind of you provided a point of stability in my life because you were able to help me navigate my financial juggling, my
Thank you.
debts and
Well,
all the other.
yeah, I mean, very much back then in the noughts, my focus was on what should we say, debt advice, debt help, etc.
Yeah,
And that was kind of my entry into the trade. I'd obviously become aware of a few publicans in financial difficulty and realized that actually it wasn't just a few, it was probably the majority. Um, and through a series of sort of strange serendipities, yeah, I ended up at the Sun and Doves. I think a mutual friend of ours, Steve Corbett, was passenger in my car and said, "Turn left here, turn left there." Right, we're at the pub, So
yeah,
I think, if memory serves, the same day, we also then drove off to the Eagle, where I also bumped into another absolute great friend of mine, long-term friend, Dave Law. So yeah, it was quite a day, and I'm happy to say I'm still friends with all three of you gents. It's
yeah,
wonderful to kind of consider that. And along the way, obviously, I was riding in on your tailcoat a bit because you guys had already started campaigning. And I think a month or two after we'd been introduced, the Fair Pint campaign began, which you were seminal in pushing for reform. And that reform, for those that are interested, was centered around the leased and tenanted
yeah,
publicans, that were renting pubs like yourself, who, let's face it, had got together, produced evidence that they were not being dealt with fairly, and eventually government did act, and that's a whole series of podcasts in itself. I mean, that's a hell of a long one, but it neatly dovetails into this very first podcast and what we wanted to discuss today, which was help and where to get it, and
mhm.
how that works for publicans and people involved in the pubs trade. And I know we were laughing about it a bit before we started recording, which was because, as you said, this could be a very short podcast because there isn't any. But as I think as
Well,
we peel it back, there are layers of help which I suppose range from the statutory, at the very top level, your government, local government, your agencies, and then it kind of goes down into a sort of a professional sort of sector, a private sector, but it's normally professional. So you might have risk surveyors, people in there. You've got organisations, the British Innkeepers Institute. the UK hospitality,
Yeah.
nighttime industries, so there's some sort of organizations in there. Myself, I mean, I run the pubs advisory service. And then you've got obviously your mates, the punter across the bar, the local barrister who just happens to enjoy a pint, well-meaning. I think you could say there's a sort of well-meaning advice there. So I'm kind of in terms of laying this out for people. Let's start at the very top.
Well,
Mark,
look, I just want to, I want to say something here, which is that one, the situation hasn't really changed in 20 years, right? That's one thing.
yep,
The if you're able to sort of helicopter view the entire situation from above and look at all the stuff that all the groups you mentioned. When I signed a lease in 1995, there was still an active licensed victuallers association and a federation of licensed victuallers. They may exist in title, but there's no effective existence of them.
so those were
And
local networks for those that are not aware, yeah,
yeah,
or
uh,
LVAs where people would meet, socialize, and also share experiences and contacts, yeah.
yeah, and I,
Yes.
I I think actually on that one, I occupy a really unusual. I mean, there will be other people like me around, but the timing of my coming into the pub sector put me in a really unusual position, having this discussion now,
Mm,
because without knowing it, I arrived as an era of pubs ended and a new era was beginning. Right in the middle, I was right on the cusp of that happening. So I used to. I'm very good at believing I don't know enough about anything, and I always want to acquire more knowledge. So when I signed a lease on a pub, I wanted to know more about pubs, even though I had a lot of hospitality background. So I immediately got involved with the local licensed victuals association, which used to meet in a pub in Greenwich. My pub was in Camberwell in Southeast London, and Greenwich is not too far away.
correct.
So I
Yeah.
went to a few of those meetings, and basically they were kind of. I don't want to romanticize this, but yeah, I felt very. I was 36 or 37. I was clear very easily the youngest person going to those meetings. And the guys, it was a bit like a scene from, I mean, at the time, I thought it was like a scene from the Pickwick Tales or something like this, some sort of Charles Dickens novel, where all these portly, largely Irishmen wearing, I'm not even making it up. I mean, they weren't all like this, but like wearing tweeds, wearing great green tweeds, who were clearly quite well off, who had been publicans in Southeast London for decades and decades and decades,
Yeah.
and they were all at the end of their careers and they were all leaving,
Mm,
and and they were talking then about who's going to sustain this organization. And subsequently, actually, I've seen that with the Rotary Club and all kinds of other stuff as well, which are dying out. But and as you say, it was a kind of informal network of people who gave each other support. I never got into that network because I was too young, too new. It didn't last long enough. And then in the interim, Fairpint, all kinds of other things happened, like me getting involved with setting up Fairpint campaign, you and me meeting and doing all this kind of stuff. But what's never changed is no one's ever addressed the issue of there not being any licensed publicans representative trade body
mm.
in all that time. There's
Well,
still,
well, I'll put a hand up. I am a member of the Kent LVA, which actually has been revitalized,
all right, okay.
it's been re-energized, and I will take you down there to meet them.
Yeah, yeah,
That'd be a
definitely.
good day out, and you can see what's going on there. And heads up to them because again, I think they recognised there was literally a gap in the market, and so what had started off as a collection of pubs in and around Gravesham, which is that top end of Kent, involves Gravesend and places like that, is actually grown into a sort of a whole of Kent LVA, and that's been
Oh,
really
that's
good.
really interesting. I had no
And
idea about it.
yeah, so they've been doing some good stuff and picked up lots of members. So there's a good story there, and that's probably something we can focus on. And I mustn't forget there are a few little LVAs out there that could, also be a source of help. And it's interesting your perspective of that it did die out. I did think there was definitely when I got involved in the Noughts and went to some of the early BII meetings, there was definitely a group of, as you say, mostly older publicans, men and women, who almost born above a font. They were born into the industry. They were almost multi-generational, and they had incredible skills. They would know off the top of their head, the GP of every product behind the bar.
Yeah, yeah,
Had a
yeah.
really good hand. They might be illiterate, some of them, in terms
No,
of being able to
absolutely.
write a letter, but they knew the trade. like the
No,
back
they
of their
had
hand. Mm.
I mean, actually, this is again, this is a subject of another episode of a whole episode is looking into right. The pub sector now is largely de-skilled.
Mm.
So when people take on a pub, they're almost inevitably people who have very little or to zero experience of pubs as a as a profession.
Yep.
And that's a tradition which has been lost. And that's one of the weaknesses of the pub sector ongoing, because when there are pubs available to be, there are actually functioning buildings that are available to lease, to rent, or
Yep.
operate. There's very few people capable of doing that. But back to my being on the cusp of all of that very early on. So I signed my lease in December 1995. And at that time it was with Entrepreneur. And there was a kind of uh, information giving service by Entrepreneur then, because I think I found out about the LVA through them, through it. And I was sent on a few licensing training seminars, which
Yep.
were run by Entrepreneur. That's another separate one. But I got wind at the time, and this is in a sense it's just a historical thing because I've not even been able to manage to find a record of it on the internet, although I've not searched for this recently. And it would have been in 1996, I think, of a meeting at the Floral Halls in Pimlico, which is a huge public space
Mm.
where there were thousands of people turned up. I mean, I don't know how many thousand. And it was Bernie Crean. It was around the Bernie Crean thing, and it was about trying to get the European Union
Yeah.
to take
The
to
commission,
analyze
yeah, the
the Thai
commission should
pub
look
sector
into
here.
that complaint. Again, another whole episode we can
Yeah,
we
yeah.
can
No,
definitely cover that. Yeah.
that was it because I knew very little about the beer tie other than I'd signed a tied lease, and
Mm.
I mean I wasn't stupid, but I hadn't there was no way I could find out what the prices of this tied lease meant in terms of my supply prices. I got wind of this meeting somehow. It may have even been published in the Morning Advertiser. I really can't remember how it happened. I went with
Yep.
Nikki, who's now my partner, and a guy called Phil, who was the bar manager at the pub, and there were thousands of people there. It was astonishing, and we were completely naive. We didn't really understand what all these people were, who these people were. They were clearly
Mm.
publicans, right? I was there stunned that so many people could be there
Mm.
at this big public meeting, and it was all about this beer tie thing and some case which I had not heard of. It was a celebrated case, and um, and I learned then because there was a question situation where questions were asked from the floor on the stage. How many people here are tied? Like everybody put their hands, nearly everybody in the room put their hands up, and who's fully tied? And I was like, fully tied? What does that mean? Right? I mean, I see it.
The jargon and the trade terms are
Yeah, yeah,
amazing.
yeah. Because I knew I was tied for cascade for draft products and draft and bottle products free of tie for one cask ale and ciders free and all packaged non-alcoholic wines, spirits. I was free of tie. So I thought that's what the beer tie was. And no, there were people there who had to buy toilet rolls and
Other
toilet cleaning
supplies.
and kitchen products from their
Yeah.
their brewer from Shepherd Neame was the one that was mentioned at the
I
time.
think this is a really, interesting point. I mean, I've been an advice giver for several decades, and I always think the failure of advice, is if it's overwhelming and badly phased. And in an effort to try and, make these podcasts as valuable as possible, we want to obviously view them ourselves as a source of help, more
Yeah,
help than entertainment. I'm sure it will be entertaining at times because we do like to laugh about some of this stuff because it is so
yeah,
ridiculous. But in terms of what you're describing, the trade terms, I remember very early on sitting down, I think, in the pub with yourself, probably Dave Law as well, and Steve Corbett. And Steve was talking about MATs, BBs, wet dry splits, and I was lost. I mean, I thought, what the hell am I doing here? How am I ever going to learn all this stuff? And I
yeah.
think it's absolutely key. I want anyone that's, listening to this to get a grip. Both you and me have been at the newbie stage, at the zero level, know
Yeah,
nothing, completely embarrassed. What the hell, But I think to your credit, mine somewhat, and other people, actually sharing that information was crucial and key to our understanding and our knowledge and building that confidence and allowing what happened next, which, at least for our history and our part in this wonderful trade that's been going on for centuries is that, you know, we brought about a significant reform which had just didn't exist. You know, there hadn't been any
Yeah,
reform. So, you know, we
yeah,
brought about a massive change, literally on a shoestring with a handful of us. And we will have an episode name checking, bringing back some of those people to, you know, talk about
yeah.
that period. I think it's absolutely it's full of merit to do that. And I think it will help with our memories as well because we do forget things. But yeah, we were all there. We were all there one day. We were newbies. We knew nothing. And I think, you know, when we talk about the help, part of this help, you know, through this podcast is that we want to supply resources. So things like the trade jargon, glossary, you know, things that people don't
Yeah.
understand. We're going to be encouraging people to give
Well,
us feedback, go onto our website and download all of this. So where you'll find this podcast will be eventually on YouTube, but for the most part, it will begin live on the Pubs Advisory Service website, which is pubs.expert. So pubs.expert, and there will be a page dedicated to this podcast, and there'll be resources as well. So, yeah, you and me keenly want to make sure that we don't just talk about what you know what the gaps are in the knowledge or the gaps in help, but actually fill them in as best we can and really leverage that because we know that's power. I mean, could we just chat about the top level support? I think you think of it as top level support, but government, local authorities. I mean, our experience of dealing with those organisations is, oh my God, you know, it goes on and on. I mean, you know, they have been largely difficult, myopic, and that's my
three.
view of it. But where have you know if you was to begin confronting, you know, let's call it the executive, the top level government, where would you have started? You know, as a publican, what would be your? Is it your local MP? Is it something else now? You know,
But you know, as I say, I don't think it has. I don't think it has changed. I know I jump around, but I just
mm,
wanted. I'll hold that on the jargon thing. I sat in a meeting talking about my pub that I signed a lease on with a guy from Entrepreneur, who was telling me there was a minimum purchase obligation of
MPO,
this
yeah,
pub of 300 barrels, right?
yeah,
Now I sat there. I thought very clear. I remember this moment very clearly. 300 barrels. I saw in my mind an 11-gallon keg, and I thought 300. I can do that, no trouble.
yeah,
Now, what he was talking about was something which is more than 3 times bigger than that. It's a brewer's barrel, 36 gallons.
36, four
And
Firkins,
so
yeah,
basically, I was thinking I can do that no trouble on something which was less than a third of the volume he was expecting. And I knew that I would be fined if I didn't meet that amount. I was being completely now. In my case, I was fortunate because in my first year I did 558 barrels, real barrels, right? So it
yeah,
far exceeded their expectations. But this is the kind of jargon issue. That is a leases now say that they're obliged to tell people about the volume, but that was a thing that was used to penalize people.
yeah.
On your point about where do you start, I think I'm probably a pretty good example of that. And I think from the amount of contact I have with lessees now, not nothing substantial has changed in 30 years since I signed that lease. It
Mm.
is 30 years, isn't it? 1995,
You consider that the lack of help
25.
and support is manifest. It hasn't actually shifted much on the dial at all. Yeah.
Well, so number one, as a publican, I felt I didn't know who to talk to. I didn't know my natural inclination would be to talk to other publicans, but I didn't know any of the publicans because I was too busy running my pub.
Yeah.
To literally go and talk, go and find, narrow them down and get a relationship going with them. So
Mm.
that was out. So I got to know in passing local councillors and other people involved in Campbell Society and bits and pieces. People who've got some sort of authority locally, they were all clueless. I mean, I would say I don't mean this pejoratively. They knew nothing about it. They just used pubs to go to. They didn't realise there was anything untoward going on. And then I'd start trying to reach out to my local MP, who was Harriet Harman,
Yeah.
who was actually I developed a very cogent, very comfortable relationship with over the years, and other MPs in south of the river. But none of them was informed at all about what was going on with pubs, and that the case remains the same because I still have got, as you do, quite quite active relationship out there in the public area to do with publicans. Yeah, so my yeah,
Reaching
so I
you were putting out feelers, Mark. That's why I describe it. You're putting out feelers, and as you say, because of the enormous commitment of time and energy into getting this pub going. You weren't able to build this sort of interpersonal relationships with other publicans.
No.
But obviously, at some point, that cracked because either Steve Corbett came down to your pub, or you went up to his pub, or you met in the middle of the
Well,
street one day
well,
crying. I don't
well,
know. What was it?
well, actually, I mean, if you look at that, I started released in 1995. I met Steve Colbert in um do you know I can't remember when, but it was considerably long time after that. So I
Almost
set up I
almost
set
a
up in,
decade. Yeah,
no it will have been
it was in the noughts, I'm sure. But my
it certainly
memories.
no, it certainly was. But what did happen in that time? So I set up the pub, got the pub going in 1995.
Mm,
It was incredibly busy. It got busier and busier and busier for the first 5 years, and then it started to tail off after that because other pubs in the area started to be refurbished, and they were doing rather what I'd done, which was be
yeah.
like a gastropub. And through that, I met Steve Corbett.
Mm,
Now that will have been 2001, I think.
right.
And by then, I met Steve. Oh, sorry, it is an anecdote. I had a second bar in Islington by then.
Yeah.
This is just before 9/11, and there's no long story. And bizarrely, I got this is all me trying to get out of not having an overdraft facility at the Sun and Doves. Yeah, open another business, get some income in.
To avoid the overdraft.
Yeah, yeah. And I met that was free of tie, and sorry, even by then, I was trying to find out what free of tie price lists were like because I was
It
negotiating
was
with
like a
Scottish
like a
Newcastle.
secret, isn't it? Nobody's
Yeah,
sharing
yeah, yeah,
prices.
yeah.
Yeah.
So what I was doing, so I was tied to Scottish Newcastle in Camberwell on the Sun and
Mm.
Doves, doing something like 550 barrels a year, huge amount of turnover, which I reckoned that I knew that I was being ripped off, but I couldn't figure out how much.
Yeah.
So I signed this.
There was this uneasy feeling it's not quite working well, and
Well,
then
well,
so yeah.
well, the uneasy feeling came about because I wasn't making any profit.
Well, let's face it. I mean, I think it needs to be said, Mark, and given that this is the first podcast, running a pub is a commercial enterprise.
Yeah,
It's about business. I mean, I know there are people out there who are what I might loosely call, or you might loosely call, lifestylers. For them, the pub is a lifestyle.
yeah,
A lot of what we're going to discuss in the future episodes is basically aimed at business. It's about people that want to be serious about this and make money. I mean, pretty much everyone I help and deal with, off air, if you like, off podcast, um, it's commercial. It's all about I want them to be profitable and
yeah,
successful, or they want to stop losing money, or they need some advice in some specific area. And the very nature of advice giving for me has changed massively in this trade, even in the last decade. And I think the underlying point, which hasn't changed that much, is the access to help. Because,
yeah.
well, apart from social media, right? So, I mean, we can talk about how Facebook and things like that have come in, and that's maybe another level of the help. So you've got top level, we've got government, and we've got MPs, councillors, local authorities, even government agencies. There's obviously things like trading standards, valuation office agency,
Yeah.
etc. Even the HMRC. Um, do they give advice? Not really. Can they clarify things? Well, they should do. Quite often they leave people in more uncertainty and a little bit gasping.
Well,
And I think the first person advice seeking that you were discussing, and trying to get to, and seminally, I think, your meeting with Steve is a kind of an interesting point in where the whole advice world spins and turns because, I think, as I recall, you said to me you spent 2 or 3 years convincing Steve there was something wrong and he wasn't convinced.
well, no, actually, it was the other way around because I
Go
met
on.
Steve. I
Yeah.
met so in Islington, I in this site in Islington, I actively sought Scottish and Newcastle free trade rep
Mm.
so I could get a free of tie deal there, so I could compare the prices there with what I was tied to Scottish Newcastle in Camberwell, and I was kind of trying to keep the two things separate, and I discovered that they barely talk to each other anyway. The Tide side don't talk to
Yes, the
the
on sales teams are just separate to
yeah,
the
they're different. They're different worlds altogether. I mean, they're
yes.
literally different businesses. They're almost not porous. So that's one thing. So it was the free of tie rep there said to me, "I want you to come across the road. There's a guy called Steve Corbett in the Slug and Letters across the road. Um, on Islington Green, and I told him about you having. He did know I had this place in Camberwell by then, and he says he'd love to meet you because he's got the Cambria and the George Canning on either side of your pub. And when I met
Yeah,
Steve, it turns out Steve's a Geordie. I am a Geordie, right? We
I know.
we just hit it
What are
off.
the chances of that? Two
Yeah,
Geordies ending up next door to each other. I know.
we hit it off instantly. Like it was just, I honestly, it was one of those rare. We hit it off immediately. And he said he had a big glass of rosé, and he was doing this. And he said, "I just want to say thanks, mate, because we came into your pub in the summer last year and had a fantastic burger, or I think it was a burger, and a bottle of rosé of your lovely organic rosé, and thought, blimey, right? And we tied leases on two pubs either side of you, and copied what you were doing." So he said all of that, but
Unashamedly open, Steve. I
yeah,
mean,
yeah, 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 and
yeah,
and
we
I
will
said,
get
"Well,
him on a
flat,
podcast. We'll get him on.
and I was like that. And
Uh,
what better flattery can you be? Anyway, that was good. But the point about Steve is he had a huge amount of experience in the pub sector
mm,
before,
yeah.
and he lived his entire life since a teenager working pubs and had worked for operators who had multiple sites and all kinds of stuff like this. And he'd done bars, clubs, restaurants, and
Yes.
been doing pubs. And at the time, he had about 20 pubs with another guy called Brian Coughlin, and and he said to me sometime down the line, "It took you 2 years to convince me, but I think you're right about the tie. I think we are being ripped off."
Mm,
I think the thing about that is that when you're used to these things happening, they creep up. Because when we first started talking about the rent, he was saying, "Well, you do a back of a fag packet thing, don't you? You know," and it was kind of like you said, you touched on this earlier about a licensee might not be literate, might not be fully literate, but they're incredibly skilled. They know the GPs of all the products, they know the margins, they know all that kind of stuff. This is the way it
mm,
was.
yeah,
Kind of um, vernacular learning of the trade and being very good at the trade. You don't have to be a literary genius. What you got to be is very good, very attuned to the commercial reality of what you're dealing with.
sure.
And it was Steve that alerted me to lots of this stuff. Now, sorry, I'm jumping around, but touching, it is my thing.
But that
Touching,
your connection to him kind of gives you, I think, the lift and the confidence for what comes next. And so I often find, I think that one of the biggest sparks to people, you know, getting help and support is contact with other publicans. Yeah. And I think, it's absolutely apt to point out at this point, I've never worked tillside, I've never run a pub. My experience is one to do with disputes and advice giving and resourcing people. That's my kind of skill set, and helping people execute a plan, because
yeah,
you know pubs can end up drifting, and I think people need plans, short-term, long-term plans. They need
yeah,
strategies to deal with what's coming next, and I like to really help people in that way, and get those things straight and use the tools that are in front of them. So one of the another person in a pub situation like Steve here, he's actually a tool in a way. He's become a bit of a lift for you to move on, because you needed that spark, I feel. And I feel a lot of publicans need that spark. And social media, for all its ills, some of the pubs groups that we can rattle them off. There's No Pub No Rent, the Pub
yeah.
Owners Network, We All Hate Enterprise Inns and Stonegate, started by an old client of mine many years ago. Things like that. Some of these social groups are terrific because they actually do allow that connection, and they do
I,
allow the discourse. And you know what? And even though I've been an admin or a mentor or monitor on some of these groups, the amount of times I have to pull out a yellow card or red card because something's got out of hand is so tiny compared to the amount
yeah,
of discourse. And I think this belies the fact that the very, very lovely, hospitable nature of so many publicans out there is that
yeah,
actually, when you get them in the room, stuff happens. It begins, and it definitely happened, because by the time I'd met you, you had been networking with Steve and others, and stuff had happened. And so it was fascinating to see how what you had begun was actually self-help, in your way. You
no,
were
it was.
helping
It,
yourselves.
it was. And okay, so that sparks off a couple of things. One is the Morning Advertiser trade. publication, and there was one called the Publican at the time
The
as well. This is
Publican, yeah, that's right.
back when, and it was around about 2000 I met Steve, because Steve, I was able to give Steve a call when Scottish Newcastle, I was bullied by the regional director of Scottish Newcastle after losing my, sorry, I didn't lose it, after the conclusion of my first rent review, where he said he'd have bailiffs round. I didn't pay him pay him 6 grand cash. I mean, metaphorically it was, but he's 6 grand on my desk in Staines by the 5th of January
So
20.
you were put under this huge amount of pressure. So this relationship with your landlord is in real trouble because
Adversarial,
because
totally
you went
adversarial.
to a rent review. That was it. It was just a standard rent review. Yeah.
And it was totally adversarial, and the guy bullied. I mean, anyway, it was concluded, and I ended up with a 22,000 back rent bill. It meant I had to change the way the business operated
Yeah.
to pay this because I was not making any profit. In the middle of all of that, in my first 5 years, I knew how to make a business very busy, and this is very common, and this applies to community pubs. It applies to everybody who signs a lease who takes on a new business
Mm.
in licensing. If they do not know the business, if they do not know how to control costs, monitor stock, keep track of stock, cash, and all the rest of it, it's very easy to lose huge amounts of money without being aware that you're losing it.
Yeah.
That's a
Yeah.
key thing. And
Yeah.
when my pub was so busy, I was working at 70, 80, 100 hours. This is just the demands of the job. I did not understand enough about, I couldn't monitor my business because it was so busy. I couldn't handle the volume of products. My accountants didn't give me management accounts
Mm.
quickly enough because they said the volume was too big. So the point is, in the time when I was learning, I could not afford to lose money, but I was losing money constantly. By the time I had learned how not to lose money. I'm talking about stock losses, spillage, people giving away bottles of champagne, not noticing, whatever. By the time I learned how to nail all that down, my turnover dropped 300 grand a year because of competition from all these other pubs that are open in the area, and my profits didn't increase because my turnover dropped so much. So my profitability increased dramatically, but the cash
Got you.
I lost literally because we didn't have a trade. So
Yeah.
that's one thing.
Hmm.
Then the relationship with the pub company was entirely adversarial. There was nothing supportive about it at all. It was all about the pub company attacking me for my rent. And then the I can't remember when that, so it was probably around about 2001. I can't remember exactly when, but I remember calling Steve and telling him about this conversation I had where Scottish Newcastle was threatening to send the bailiffs in and lock me out of my own residence if I didn't pay them six grand on this back rent debt that I still owed.
Mm.
And he said he lent me the money and said I could
Wow.
sort you out, and
Wow.
we'll be able to really re-manage your cash flow like this. And we did, and that's around about the time I met you. I think I think that might have been. It's all a bit shaky, but I did not have anywhere to go. My accountants couldn't give me clear advice because they weren't used to dealing with the kind of business that I was running because
Mm.
they were accountants.
So yeah, this is interesting. So the professional advice around you at the time is incapable of supporting you. I
Yeah,
mean, and this goes as far as actually your landlord who offers supposedly a qualified BDM or
yeah.
a rep to come to your pub on a regular basis and review your business, and there's
Mm,
nothing they can offer either. So
no.
you've got this semblance of I'm surrounded by advisors, but none of them are advising you. Yeah, so it's
Well,
kind of
and actually, there's an interesting aspect of that as well. And I don't actually know that my experience is pertinent right now, but I would be prepared to put a small bet on that it is,
yeah.
because I've not talked to any current licensees about this aspect of it. But I certainly found myself in a situation where I felt really isolated, and I felt I couldn't trust anybody
Mm,
because it seemed to me, I mean, with justification, because my experience held this up, that wherever I commissioned advice, i.e., or support or the services of a third party, like an accountant or a solicitor or anybody who's official, they'd be charging me, 150 to 350 quid an hour for whatever.
mm.
And their advice would always come at a point when it was too late to use anyway. And I just felt like, and I couldn't trust a BDM, a business development manager from my pub company, because they just seemed to be using everything I told them, because I'm very upfront and honest about things, against me when it came to a rent review.
Sure.
So, and,
Yeah,
and,
yeah. Well,
and,
this is back to
and
what I said. a while ago, which is about badly phased. Advice is unsuccessful, when it's either overwhelming or badly phased. And that cuts through, not just this sector, but many other sectors, and even personal life for people. It's absolutely crucial. And I spend a great deal of time and effort trying to segment and deliver advice in a way which people can consume and use really effectively. And I'm completely aware that we run a risk in doing a whole series of podcasts as overwhelming people. So, as part of the challenge here today is to do something kind of new, probably a little bit awkward for us, first time type thing, but
Yeah,
the intention behind it for us is core, and I want to make sure that the listeners, especially those running pubs or thinking of operating a pub, is that actually we do know a hell of a lot that could be very useful leverage for you listeners out there, and
yeah,
I want to tap into as many sectors and as many little dusty, smoky corners, if you like, of this trade to pick that apart. And we're never going to cover that in one podcast, that's for sure. I mean, the very essence of help to me has been that when I got into the sector, I was kind of directed not towards an individual, but towards an organization. And at that time, the prescient organization that was in growth and had thousands and thousands of members was the BII, British Innkeepers
yeah,
Institute. And um, just trying to recall now, I believe I was a guest of the AGM and the large annual show that they used to have there up in Mayfair. And I went along to one of these big things. Very impressive. To be honest, I was slightly overwhelmed myself. What the hell am I doing getting into this industry? There's a room full of 1,000 people here, and some great speeches and some really useful information. I came away overwhelmed, excited, and quite interested in the whole, how does this all knit together? And my background is, before advice giving, was one of engineering. So I'm quite interested in process, how things
yeah,
work. And so I wanted to know a bit more about this process. And it was a combination of listening to the BII, listening to people like yourself, and then reading the evidence and reading what was going on. Some of that was the Morning Advertiser as a resource. They didn't have social media. There were some forums there which were quite hilarious. We could talk about the Morning Advertiser forums. They were almost legendary at one point for their
it was really
intensity.
interesting.
Their intensity. They oh well, can't go into that one. But it might be very libelous, some of the things that were said there. But if we think about it, the BII was kind of the gatekeeper or the arbiter. They had the platform, they had the microphone, the speakers, they had everything. And for sure, there were some really interesting, impressive people there. Equally, there were some people there who I wasn't really sure what they did. Slightly
Yeah,
confusing. Their focus was, it was great in some areas and it was a bit lacking in others. And I think they were right to kind of big up what they did in terms of the awards and the shows and recognizing excellence and all of that. And I think the BII still has an interesting future under Steve Alton. He's an interesting guy. I've had a few chats with him. I'll try and get
yeah,
him on a show as well. I think that would be good.
yeah. I'd really like to meet him actually.
And yeah,
Yeah,
and so slowly but surely, I think a couple of people at BII got aware that I had a background in giving debt advice, and they invited me to start helping and supporting members, which was really good of them. I was quite surprised that there was no service level arrangement signed or anything like that. There was no money offered. It was just like, hey, you could be useful. We got members in trouble. And
yeah,
and I started getting into that. And it was a bit of a baptism of fire because, I got up to speed pretty quickly with all the trade terms and the jargon and everything else. And I am indebted to a few people there that, really helped with that education. And I'm still friends with a couple of the old guard, that are still knocking around. And you'll obviously recognize the name Phil Dixon for one.
yeah.
Phil's retired now, and obviously Mike Clist, who, when we first knew Mike, wasn't at the BII, he was at Fuller's
The
doing
Fullers,
his
yeah,
doing his thing at Fuller's. But they're two gents that have definitely been kind of there as long as we've been there,
yeah,
for sure. And yeah, they'll be good copy. If I can get them interviewed and we have a chat one day, we will. So the help for me, as I looked at it from an outsider's point of view, was it pretty much was the BII or your BDM, and that was it. The other kinds of help was so vertically integrated. your accountant would only deal with your books. They wouldn't offer you any other advice, really. You know, it would, as you say, it was very narrow and tight and almost no use to you. Not
No,
in terms
actually,
of what you're facing. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Sorry, I mean, this is triggering all kinds of memory. I mean, when I say that, it's not nostalgic.
No.
This is all part of the record of the past, and that is, it dawned on me. Right, I was a member of the BII,
Hmm.
and as my first rent review approached, the BII does do some very good stuff. There's no doubt. But having said that, I can't tell you what it is. But no, but because I ceased to become a member, I stopped paying my membership with the BII as my first rent review approached. And at that time, I was told specifically by BII that of all these things that they offered advice and support on, rent reviews was not one of them.
Right.
And I was a bit indignant about this at the time because I thought, well, the rent review, what is more important in a publican's life than a rent review?
Making
And
money, isn't
BII
it? Yeah.
can't support on that. Um,
Mm.
and I suppose what my end result of all this is, I realized that I felt isolated.
Mm.
My area manager was telling me that I was having troubles with my financial reality of the pub, that none of the other businesses, none of the other publicans in his area or her, there was I had a female BDM once. No one else was reporting these kind of problems, and yet I was one of the busiest around. So what am I doing? Am I paying? Have I got too many staff on? La la la. Are you?
So
Um,
the isolation you felt about your experience was further, you know, enhanced,
well,
encapsulated by them telling you that you're doing it wrong. You know,
yeah,
so,
that's right.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's right. And the sum of it was I felt isolated. I felt as though I was a failure. I couldn't talk to people about this in my own business because I
Mm.
was employing about 50. I can't remember now, but about 10 full-time staff and maybe five part-time staff. And yeah, by then I think I'd a manager running the business largely, but the business was spinning off so many other things.
Yeah.
Like it's difficult to describe this because as a publican, I began to it dawned on me fairly soon, which I didn't anticipate, that my pub was a significant figure in the local economy, in the local community,
Yeah.
because it started to be used by people as a meeting place, and it started and I was very open to it being used for events during the local arts festival and blah blah blah, and on and on and on. And then the pub became a cultural hub. I wouldn't call it a cultural hub at the time, but looking back on all, and that absorbed my time enormously. And
Mm.
then I'd find myself in conversations with BDMs who would be telling me, why you why do you get involved? Why do you have all these other activities going on? Because they cost money. Yet without those activities, it would reduce our turnover, our income. And
Sure.
then I started to realize that the whole trying to talk about the food, the wet led side of the business, the foods, the dry side of the business as being separate entities against the activities we were involved with, which were including art exhibitions, music performances, all manner of.
Which is kind of the things, the nice things, right? So your vision of the pub was was kind of clear cut. You were doing something a bit different to begin with, and it was being picked up and
Yeah,
rewarded with more patrons. And bizarrely, you know, the volume of sales, as you say, was dropping during this period. But in the early stages, this really picks up, and it then exposes you, your mind to actually what pubs are also really good at.
that's right. That's right. I mean, it was a very interesting experience because
Yeah.
I became passionately obsessed. And it is obsession. It clearly is. I've got 20 years of obsession to prove this about the cultural value of pubs to community.
Yeah.
Because in those conversations with area managers,
Mm.
they would say that, so basically most of the stuff that I did in the pub, which you could say is not directly pub related, which made up part of this cultural hub which this pub became,
Yeah.
which I know is what most pubs fulfill in really good, well-run pubs fulfill in their own right. They become a cultural hub.
Thing of joy. It's a thing of joy, isn't it? Yeah.
That's right. But if you take all of these extraneous things an area manager might say, well, surely you're spending money on these art exhibitions, surely you're spending money on bands, all manner of things like this. Well, actually, individually, they're all cost at least at worst cost neutral
Yeah, yeah,
in
yeah.
themselves. The only thing I never accounted for in terms of money was
Mm,
my time making sure those things happen. But the point of that is my time as a publican licensee was taken away from the business directly, but I had a manager running the business. And a pub company would say, well, you can't afford to do that because you should be that manager. But then if I was that manager, I would not be able to do all these other things, which made the business really busy, right? All these other things made the business really busy. And my job was reaching out to the community, making the pub a cultural hub,
mm,
which then brought custom in, which then needed to be treated commercially and then needed to be run as a professional business.
yeah.
And I'd be honest and say I've touched on it already. In the first 5 years, I probably lost in terms of my business 400,000 quid, maybe more,
Mm,
just in losses, just in general losses in the first 5 years.
mm.
Which sounds scandalous. It sounds scandalous, but this is common, right? If you do
Yeah.
not, my general experience is that whenever I've met a publican who's doing really well, I mean, it's not obviously a hard and fast rule. Who from the off has done really well financially, has done well. When I say done really well, I mean they haven't gone bust. Basically, there's an accountant that they know who's either a business partner or a mate who's prepared to give them loads of time to begin with until they're on top of the business. And without that, people just carry on losing money for a long time. Without that skill, without that understanding, without
Mm,
that routine on the daily business side of things, you don't have a business. What you've got is a life, as you say, a lifestyle thing.
mm.
Sorry, I mean this is all rambling around, but
No, no, it's not
uh,
rambling. It's interesting because it's kind of it's building upon, what we set out to, at the start of this podcast was to talk about the help that is out there and actually how it's really fragmented and there isn't really a one size fit all one stop service for anything.
uh,
I mean, I can only go so far with the kind of help and support that I do. I pull in specialists, to help on various issues and cases
yeah,
like, let's say, dilapidations or defending court claims, people that get involved helping out with things like renewal, et cetera, et cetera.
yeah,
But I understand how these processes work, all the mechanisms behind them. So I can demystify, to a large part, and then I can represent and assist in other parts. But it's definitely a strange landscape because from an outsider's point of view and me casting my mind back, back into the noughts there, from what I could see, I thought, wow, the BII will be the be all and end all of where a publican needs to go to get everything they need. But actually, as you describe, it didn't supply everything you needed either. On the face of it, it looks like it was all encompassing, but actually it was kind of a lot of training, a lot of awards, and actually
yeah.
the real operational meat that you were after, you didn't need anecdotes from other publicans so much saying, these are the things that we've done really well. What you needed was kind of almost
Mm.
a mentoring, a handhold at some very key moments. And let's face it, if you get your rent review wrong, that sets the problem for the next 5 years.
Well, it kind of sets a problem it sets a trajectory for the rest of the business's existence, really,
It could
because then
do. Yeah, it could
you get to the
force you
next,
to remodel. Yeah.
you get to the next rent review, and you're already being over rented,
Mm.
and you're being over rented has crippled the
It's
business
crippled you
in
and
no
you're not going to
time.
go forward. No,
Yeah,
it's absolutely right. I mean, for unlike any most other businesses, the support which is the hardest to deliver, is where people are remote. And a lot of publicans are quite remote, but social media and things like Zooms and whatnot have helped massively. I mean, I can't tell you what a game changer that's been. In
yeah, yeah,
fact, when the pandemic hit, for me personally, I thought, wow, that's the end of this business. Um, and actually, within
yeah,
a few months, it was the complete opposite. There was tons of people reaching out because more people on social media than ever before. And I think, my sort of inquiries, went from word of mouth to something like 96% Facebook, like of my workload came from
yeah, yeah.
Facebook.
Yeah.
Quite incredible. So, kudos there to Mr. Zuckerberg for producing an
Well,
amazing conduit, an amazing resource. I mean,
you know,
used for good or ill, but it
you,
was
you know,
good. Yeah.
sorry, you're absolutely spot on there because the Fair Pint campaign launched 2006. PubsCo came to play 2008. Sorry, we began, but it launched officially 2008.
Yeah.
Um, and PubsCo came into place 2016. So there's roughly a decade there. And without social media, that could never have happened.
Yeah, in
And
the
yet,
in the run up to the vote, absolutely, it was played a crucial part. And
yeah, yeah,
I can't, I can't sit and listen to too many people saying, social media has been terrible. I think it has its problems, and I think perhaps young people's use of it can be
yeah,
bad. But let's face it, you know, it has been good for grown-up men and women networking who are publicans to be able to get together and share experiences. And actually, largely, like I described earlier, it's been done in a very good way. It hasn't been descending into,
no, absolutely.
rancor and arguments. I mean, there have been periods, but largely it's been pretty smooth sailing for that. And I
I,
think that's testament to the kind of people that and their approach to it. So I
I,
don't dismiss it.
no,
It's
I agree. I mean, I agree. Yeah, my experience is that um, that regulated social media. I think these analogies apply everywhere. I think we're all involved in this weird consumer capitalism reality.
mm,
Now, Starlink, I think it's a bit weird when essentially global services are provided by private companies where public utilities are provided by private companies and where social media
there
is
could
provided
be a problem there. Yeah, there
by,
could be.
by private companies because
Yeah, yeah.
the ultimate driver of purpose is profit.
Mm,
So that prevails over every other purpose. So my experience very clearly has been there's been incredibly good, incredibly positive, very good, very genuinely useful stuff has come out of social media, Twitter, yeah,
mm.
and Facebook particularly. And I met so in a sense where the Morning Advertiser forum began,
Yeah.
and that was closed down. I can't remember when it was closed down. Facebook was already in existence then. The Fair Pint campaign existed through me and a few other people on Facebook and pardon me, and on Twitter, which were one we were able to use Twitter to deliver things like PDFs of really important information which we had gathered in terms of evidence, which was useful to the business innovation and skills department or the deputy prime minister. I mean, I remember Gordon Brown getting something through some tweets through
Yeah.
his social media access, which would never ever have got to him if it had not
Will
been.
would it happen now? I mean,
No, no, no way, no,
no
it
way.
wouldn't happen
There was
now.
a window. There was a window which opened up. You're right, and Twitter was very useful then. It's less useful now, and in
It,
fact, I barely
it was
use it myself. But
no,
yeah,
no, it was
yeah.
amazing from that point of view. But I mean, what I'm saying is the functionality of this publicly available service
Mm,
gave a route for very clean communication to areas which were not available otherwise, which was very valuable. But then at the first, I think it was called Lobby Day, which Fair Deal for Your Local arranged. I think that Greg Mulholland was involved in calling that together.
the former MP for Leeds Northwest, I'll name check.
That's right. Yeah, and people turned up. I met two people on that day who knew me from my visual. I mean, I was unaware of my presence because on social media because it was me behind a screen doing this. But two people came up to me on that day and gave me big hugs. One of them said, "If it hadn't been for you, I would have topped myself."
Oh man, yeah.
And that was because partly because of Morning Advertiser, then because of me being very honest on social media about the way I felt about myself and what had happened to me as a licensee. This is when I still had my pub, right? It was still trading then, I think. Anyway, the point being that all these, that's when I really began to fully understand that all licensees feel isolated. They
Mm,
find it very difficult to access emotional support, structural support, technical support, legal support because of their busyness. They feel isolated because of the relationship with their pub company itself is being adversarial.
Mm.
They feel that they're failures. This is an endemic problem. And then,
Well, those networks that used to exist of local publicans have largely disappeared or just turned into pub watch.
yeah, yeah,
You know,
yeah,
and
yeah.
so, a very strong impression I got back, back when we first met was that publicans were looked down upon by their pub companies if they were networking and meeting up with each other.
No, absolutely.
That was my overwhelming feeling, right? Correct me if I'm wrong, but it was
No, no,
like,
you're right.
oh, if you're going to meet up, hang on, why are you talking to them? Don't talk to them. And if so and so's, there was talk about that. I remember people saying they'd been put off, and so there was kind of like this almost unwritten, don't speak out, don't contact anyone else. Just keep your head down, keep your nose clean, and you'll be fine. But keeping your
Yeah,
head down and your nose clean was not fine, right? You were making no money out of it, and you were bumping
yeah,
into other people that
yeah.
were also not making nothing out of it. So consequently, you can see that that doesn't work. So to me, change happens when you can get people almost in a room, and I mean now it could be a Zoom room, and yeah, the help can flow from that. The just the lubrication of ideas and feedback, and actually speaking to people that have been there, walked the walk, or if they haven't walked the walk, like myself, I've had the experience of helping people walk those walks, and having seen people on through to the other side, of it all. Um,
Actually, I'm just going to cut in there
yeah,
because, right, given this is all about help, I think the summary is right. So I probably know more about this than most people in Britain, just because I've been plugged into it.
it's not
Loads of people
arrogant,
get,
it's true. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, loads of people, and I'm only feeling able to say these things without feeling self-conscious and weird about it recently because I've had time to reflect upon this because now I'm retired.
Mm.
I don't feel as I'm a financial and literal failure anymore. And I think it is worth saying I'm now a national executive member of the Campaign for Real Ale,
I forgot
which
to
is
name check you for that. Yes,
yeah, yeah, which is a separate thing in a sense,
it is
but
a separate
but
thing.
it has validated my feeling that I haven't been wrong
Well, we can do. I mean, they are
all this.
another one of those organisations within the hierarchy of help, and how can they help?
No,
But yeah,
that's right.
carry
That's
on.
right.
Yeah, you was.
And I think right, it's worth mentioning as well that all these organizations and institutions that exist around offering support and structural stuff to the pub sector in general, which is linked into the social capital value of pubs and how important they are to our culture, which then comes down to where does an individual publican get support. There's this big division between the tithe sector and the free of tithe sector, which is kind of invisible to a large degree. And then within that, that's broken up into chains and corporates as well. Now, within all of that, you've got thousands of individual licensees looking for support. And if they're in the tide or free of tide sector, but without links to a big corporate over body, if they're not yeah, if they're individual licensees running their own business,
Mm,
it's very difficult to find uh, structural support you can really rely on, really trust, really rely on. So when I get loads and I probably get, I don't know, what, two or three people a month getting in touch with me kind of out of the blue and saying, I'm in trouble with my pub company. Can you give me some help? And this is not to flatter you. You are the only person I'm aware of, or the pubs advisory service, I should say, that I can direct people to where I know they will get really honest, brokered support and feedback, and they're not going to get ripped off with upfront fees. This is not to sell you, but
mm,
in all this time, I've never come across any other body that does that. Um, as Federation of Small Business may be close, but that's historic, and you've got to become a member first. But they're good brokers of good quality information. But
mm,
then there's a time delay between. It's not a personal service; it's just the way it works. And I've come across individuals who, on the face of it, offer services which look a bit like Pubs Advisory Service, but they're always in it from a commercial point of view. And somehow, and I've never engaged enough in this deeply, but somehow they're people who have spun out of the Tide pub sector and have been burned in some way, or have seen that there's a lot of possible support that can be given there. And I categorize those kind of like a little bit like ambulance chasers. They're kind of there
Mm,
knowing there's a problem and knowing they can take advantage of that. And in a sense, that's not a problem, but their advice is never, is from what I can generally gather, kind of really objective. It's all
sure.
it's based on profit motive again. It's based on profit motive. And this is not to say I'm not,
Not that there isn't a space for that. I mean, I think it's important that people, searching for advice can kind of get enough due diligence at the start to
yeah,
make sure they're approaching the right people in the right way. I mean, I think one of the issues that it's worth saying, pointing out, is that a lot of people, by the time they seek advice, it's not quite too
to
late, but it's
it's
late. It's very late in the
yeah.
day. And I do an awful lot of crisis management, that's fair to say.
Um,
I would prefer people to come earlier. I'd always prefer people to read the resources, go onto my website. Any newbies that are thinking of taking on pubs, I've got 45 questions to ask a pub company. That will get you to the meat of where you need to be pretty quickly. I mean, that's designed not because 45 questions I wanted to hit a target. It's because actually, as I started to break it down line by line, case by case, thought by thought, that's what it took. And in fact, I think it's not 45, it's 46 questions because I added one.
yeah,
But, you
yeah.
know, but it's been probably the most visited web page I've ever had. And it's there because it's useful. And I really, really do want people to come early for advice. Early stage advice, honestly, it's for the want of a nail sometimes, isn't it? Later on we're going to need a bulldozer, but come early, get a nail. I'd rather that than come late and have to pay for a bulldozer.
That's the difficult one, isn't it? But how can you get people out there who, how can we, one, the whole situation, get people out there who are in this situation of feeling locked in, can't find advice, on a hamster wheel, trying to keep their business going? How can you get them to take time out
Yeah,
early enough
yeah.
before they get to the point at which it's pretty much too late?
Well, I think it's an absolute great point for me to, put this out there, but we're going to set up a WhatsApp number just for
Yeah,
this podcast, and any publican, anyone in the trade, they can contact that WhatsApp, and they can leave a voice note, or voice message,
yeah, that's a good
VM,
idea.
VN, whatever they call them now. You'll be able to just get that, and you'll be able to get in touch, with this show, with this podcast, with myself and others, and essentially get that information over to us, reach out, tell us how you're feeling, whatever it is. And some of those people, we want them to get in touch. I mean, if people want us to keep their confidences, withhold their names and stuff, just let us know on the voice message. If you don't mind, that's cool. Just give us all your details, and then maybe some of these people will even call you back, and we'll see if you want to take part in the show because you may have something very interesting to say that we want to discuss and look at. And this is all in an effort to continue this kind of conversation that you and me have been having over many years, and how we've helped each other, and
Yeah,
you've helped PASS become what it is. I've helped you in your business life previously, and
yeah,
and now
yeah.
you've morphed into the great and the good. You're one of the establishment
Very
now
interesting
that
thing.
you're
Yeah,
a director of camera. But you know, along this way, I think we're going to offer this out. This is going to be something new. I'm not sure how it's going to work. I hope it's going to take off, but I really would like people to just get a grip of the fact we're going to have a WhatsApp, and I'm going to have the number flashed across the video here. Later on, I'll edit that in, and that will enable people to go to that number, and I'll put the link on their webpage as well, and leave a message, and then we'll pick up on these, and then we'll use some of that because I really want to make sure that we where at all possible, and I like to think Pubs Advisory Services being kind of like the standard bearer of quality advice. I want to enhance whatever tools I've got now to leverage that, make it even bigger and better
yeah,
for people. And using this sort of technology in this way, I've sat back and watched it develop over the years, and I do think there's enough space now within people's daily routines, pub life, to actually not exactly sit and watch the podcast, but have it on in the background. There's a new skill that people have learned. They'll put on a
yeah,
YouTube and they'll just let it run. They'll just let it run in the background. They weren't even watching it. They'll
yeah.
continue with their work. So hopefully, however people are listening to us now, whether it's just audio only or they're sitting watching it, they'll get a semblance of where we want to go with this. and how we'd like this to work. I'm going to try and keep all forms of editorial control and direction to a bare minimum because I think it's important that where people get in touch, some of their stuff does segue off into, other parts of their life. And,
Yeah.
you know, I didn't set out to be, a psychiatrist or whatever, but, along the way, I've had an awful lot of very interesting conversations with publicans about all manner of aspects of their lives and choices and things that they want to do. So the experience of that, and being exposed to those situations, I can reflect upon it, and I'm pretty certain I can help people with their strategies one way or the other for many years to come. So, this is probably a good point to wrap up. Have you got any final thoughts, Mark, about where we go next? What would be your next podcast you'd like us to do if we're going to pick one? Oh, stalled
You
him.
know, but this is a classic problem with me because I've got this kind of there is just so much to deal with,
Mm,
and um, ultimately, for me, it all comes down to fairness, openness, and transparency. And I think if I'm absolutely convinced if society would run fairly openly and transparently, we wouldn't have these problems.
no.
So I think
Well, maybe next time we'll talk about exploitation, the exploitation of men and women in
I
pubs,
think
and the exploitation of the pubs themselves. The big.
I think it's worth bringing that up, talking about the where the pub sector is up to right now. What is going on with the pub as a secular construct as this thing which is important to Britain.
The state of the nation. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
the
and
point.
referencing the imbalance of power
Okay,
between the property holders and the operators, the people who run the businesses,
sure.
touching on analogies like the post office scandal
Yeah.
and how you call it the asymmetry of power is a huge problem.
Mm,
Whereas law seems to treat the relationship between the pub company or the freeholder, because it doesn't have to be
no,
a tied. I always think pub company tied, but there are pub companies like Wellington Inns, for example, that are not.
just
They
property
are free
owner.
of tie. But
Yes.
the ultimate problem lies in the difference in the imbalance of power, that asymmetry of power between the property owner and the person who's
Yeah.
running the
Yeah.
business, and the person who's running the business not having enough information,
We can
not
we
being
can we can
able to.
do a whole show on information asymmetry
Yeah, 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 yeah.
and how damaging it is.
No,
And in
that's
fact,
right.
I spend a lot of time revealing to people information which they didn't know, and if they had known it, it probably would have changed what they did. You know?
No, absolutely. And I
Yeah.
think a key thing about that to understand when you're an individual running a business in pubs, it applies everywhere to some degree, but in pubs particularly, is that when you're feeling the way you are, it's because you don't know enough information. You don't have
Mhm.
enough information. When
Yeah.
you do have information, it might seem even worse than when you didn't have the information, but at least you know what you can do things then. And that a key thing to remember is that when you find out what's going on
Yeah.
with yourself and you have a route out to some area of advice, and I'd say obviously in this context it would be pubs advisory service, it's like suddenly you realize you've been in a pressure cooker and there's a valve and the steam's being let off and the pressure's going down, and you can come outside of that and watch what's going on instead of being inside it cooking.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Good
So
point.
asymmetry of power might be useful. Yeah,
Yeah. We'll leave it there. Lovely chatting to you, Mark, and
yeah, I do. Thank you.
on to podcast number two.
Yeah, thanks very much. It's been very interesting.
No
It
worries.
always is. Yeah.
Cheers. Goodbye. Hello again, this is Chris from Pubs Advisory Service. Thanks ever so much for listening to the podcast, and I really hope you enjoyed it. If you want to get in touch with the show, please use WhatsApp. You can contact us on 077 66 07 3815. That's 077 66 07 3815.